Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Monday Motivation Spotlight. I'm Lesley Kaplan, welcome you here every single week. This is your home for inspiration, for motivation, and when we hear from amazing Israelis, whether it's business owners, individuals, or nonprofits making a difference. Like every week, I thank our sponsors, Nardis Advisors, as well as Egan& and Cohen Insurance. And today, I'm super excited to be viewing to you and be exposing to you my friend and colleague who I'm actually going to spotlight instead of me, Azi. Here we go. Good morning to Azi Jankovic. In the beginning, when I first met you, Azi, I had to actually pronounce your name, but now, I think I've just heard it so much that it just comes so naturally. Who is Azi Jankovic? And Azi is actually her shortened name. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about it later if you want to, what your full name is. Dr. Azi Jankovic, should I say, who's a colleague and friend. We've known each other for a couple of years. When you tell me when you mentioned when I was asking you for your bio that you only made aliyah in 2015, I felt like, wow, like it seems like you've been here for so much longer because you've made such an impact on the Anglo
Oh,
circle here in Israel that I couldn't believe that you've been here only 10 years.
oh,
So
thank
welcome
you.
to our show, and we're delighted to have you. So who is Azi? She is an American Israeli who reclaimed her mental health after a 28-year journey since first being diagnosed with bipolar disorder in her teens. She's also a podcast host, she's a speaker, and she's the author of the number one best-selling book, which you can see in the background, Mental Health Reclaimed, which is a guide, and she'll explain a little bit more about it on dealing with mental issues and bipolar disease. So, Azzy, welcome, or disorder, should I say, welcome, and we're delighted to have you here. And we look forward to hearing your story. So, take it away, share with us,
Leslie, thank you. Thank
and
you
about your
so
Aliyah story too.
sure. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. And with all that is going on in our country, it is every day people ask me what's it like to be in Israel? And with everything happening, I still say there's really nowhere else I'd rather be. The other day I was,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. I think we
yeah,
all feel the
it's
same way.
someone said yesterday, I think it was actually Shoshana Keats Jaskell said something about this moment of unification, how special it is to be here. And I really, really feel that. It is almost a 180 in many ways from where I grew up. I grew up in a little coastal town of San Diego, California, and I was the only Jew in my class for many years. It was me, maybe one other girl, Amy, for a few years in there, but by and large, the only Jew. And I always gravitated toward Jewish wisdom. I would go to Hebrew school and Sunday school, and I just loved reading those quotes in the back of the Siddur and going into the library and finding books on Kabbalah, these really, really deep ideas that give us guidance for living well. And it's something that's always fascinated me. So as the years went on, I learned more and more. And toward the end of college, met my husband, and we knew right away that it was really a match made in heaven. My husband offered me a beer at the Chabad house, and I said to him, "I only drink Amstel Light." It was like this low carb version of a beer, and he said, "Well, you're in luck because all I brought is Amstel Light." And we were married a year later. And we went to Israel for the year to explore our heritage. We had both grown up in Reform Jewish homes, and we wanted to explore the more traditional side of Judaism. And when we got to the airport, my friends, when we arrived at Ben Gurion, my husband's second cousins came to greet us. And they didn't just greet us, but they greeted us. They came with signs, the posters, and they were singing and dancing in circles around us. And that warmth, that love, that joy that I felt there was something that inspired me really in that moment to feel so at home here. And it just continued when we went to their moshav for the first time. We experienced a Shabbat where you can't walk more than 10 steps without getting into a really great conversation with a neighbor. Everyone knows everyone. It's a little village. And, beyond that, what was interesting when I looked at my husband's family tree, the side of his family that was able to come to Israel after the Shoah multiplied. They have, I think over 120 descendants now, just after 3 generations. And the family that wasn't able to come over to Israel is pales in comparison. And when I saw that and I felt the love of the Moshav and really the joy and the values, really these values of just loving people, loving one another. It wasn't about the car in your driveway. It wasn't about, anything else. It was just about the fact that we're people, we're humans, we're family, we're fellow Jews. I fell in love. So that is what planted the dream in my heart and mind. And about 11 years later, we were able to come over. We made Aliyah in 2015 with 3 kids, and now we have 4.
Oh, so you have a Sabra, one Sabra.
Oh, yes. Yes, we do.
Wow, amazing. So tell us about that once you landed here and also about your actual, what you were going to be sharing with us, your whole background, dealing with bipolar, what led you through this whole journey.
Sure. Sure. So when we made Aliyah, I really continued to feel that embrace from the time we got to the airport, whether it was the Nefesh B'Nefesh or there's another organization in Canada that they send representatives, these organizations and then friends and family that came to greet us. And we chose to live also in a pastoral environment when we came. Hold on one second. We made Aliyah to a kibbutz. We lived in kibbutz Sha'alabim for the first 8 years of Aliyah. And it's a predominantly Israeli place. It's a Dati Lumi kibbutz and absolutely beautiful pastoral place, really close-knit community. And when the shuttle, took us to our new home in Shalavim, the entire neighborhood was on our street with flags and signs. And once again, we felt this real love as fellow Jews, fellow Israelis, and spent the first 8 years in this very unique, special, warm, and Israeli place. I think it gave us a wonderful experience by way of learning about the culture, learning about the people. And my kids grew up in a largely Israeli environment, which, in many respects, there's always trade-offs. There were challenges by way of the language and the culture, but there was always a gift by that as well, that they learned Hebrew very quickly and learned the culture very quickly as well, which was wonderful. And let's see. After about 8 years or so, my kids needed something a little bit different. They needed, wider options for the school. So we moved over to the city of Modi'in, which we also love so much. And as much as it's a city, it still has that community sort of village feel. I'm sure in a lot of places, perhaps where you live, there's a street WhatsApp, a neighborhood WhatsApp, and always someone you can borrow a cup of sugar from or a few eggs. So we still have that feeling. And I think also after the war started, Lesley mentioned earlier that she started this Monday Motivation after the war began. And she said something so profound that the war really changed all of us. And I know for me, moving to Modi'in was incredibly supportive when the war began because we were surrounded by so many Anglos. And as much as I'd learned Hebrew, there's still something for me, perhaps you could identify, about being in an English speaking WhatsApp, an English speaking conversation, especially in a difficult time where it's just more accessible to have those conversations and get involved. And this community of Modi'in really, really mobilized after the war. There were people, I remember one day, it was so beautiful. Someone in LA reached out to me and she said, is there any chance you might be able to get 50 of these sort of specialized knives to a group of soldiers down in this remote base in the South? And I happened to be with a friend near a store to get the knives. And we picked them up, and my friend posted something on her neighborhood WhatsApp group. Is anybody traveling to such and such area? And within 15 minutes, someone drove to us, picked up the knives, and took them down to the soldiers that day. And it was just this perfect example of what a tight-knit network we are here. And so it was a real bracha to be in that space, to be in that English speaking network once the war began, to have that support. Today, our eldest is in the IDF. She initially started Sherut in, let's see, 3 years ago. And after the war began, something within her moved her to have a change of heart and move into the IDF. And so that's what she did. About 9 months later, she's at the Kiryah. She has a misuvag position, which means every day she comes home and I say, "How was your day?" And she says, "Good." And that's the end of the conversation. So, I have so much respect for her that she's working really hard over there. She's learning a lot, and I really couldn't be prouder. Lesley, what else can I tell you? Do you want me to take you back to this
Yeah,
the
I want
book
you to take
story,
us
the mental
back.
health
Exactly.
story?
Take us back to when you were a teenager and where your whole journey with mental health started.
Absolutely. It's interesting, and I'm sure that people here can relate to this one. After the war began and we started getting exposed to like the October 8th and thereafter anti-Israel, anti-Jewish sentiment that we didn't really know existed to this degree. I myself started having these memories of being exposed to anti-Semitism as a kid. Anybody else here have that experience, suddenly remembering these moments? Um, so I remember even one time in ninth grade, I was beat up by a group of girls for going to a school dance with someone whose mother was Mexican. They didn't like that. I was Jewish. I wasn't really allowed to date one of them. And I was actually attacked at school. There were other moments at school where there were certain kids that would stand in the school lunch line and they would ask for spare change. And if you didn't give them change, they would call you a heeb and a bagel lover and I had really forgotten about a lot of these things. And I think as a teenager, I suppressed them in a lot of ways. I was always taught to be strong. And for me at the time, I thought being strong was just sort of sweeping those things under the rug. But right around the time of my 15th birthday, I started experiencing a lot of sadness and feelings of isolation and having a tough time. And there were absolutely reasons, there were situations, there were concrete, I can point to them today because I've done the work. There were reasons for this, but at the time, it felt a little bit mysterious why this 15-year-old suddenly didn't want to go to school every day. And my mom took me, like every good mother, she took me to my general practitioner, a nice little lady named Dr. Benjamin, nice little Jewish lady. And when I got to her waiting room, she had me fill out the Beck depression inventory. It's a set that still exists today. And it asked me how I was feeling and how I was feeling about the future. Had I ever thought of hurting myself? Really standard questions to assess depression. And my mom was sitting next to me. And I was very much afraid of burdening her or worrying her. And so I fudged my answers. I didn't report the degree to which I was actually having trouble. And we got into Dr. Benjamin's office and she read over my answers and she said, "Not to worry. You have something called moderate clinical depression, and you just take this pill. It's a brand new pill on the market. It's really phenomenal. It's called Prozac, 20 milligrams a day, and you'll be good to go." So I went home and started taking those prescription drugs. And over the years or over the months, even my personality started changing. I remember I started hearing the birds chirping early in the morning. And I did get through high school, and in a lot of ways, it did get me out of bed in the morning, but it caused other issues for me. One of which was really impulsivity. And as a senior in high school, I went on a skateboarding trip and went straight down a hill, had a compound fracture in my left leg. And by the time I got to graduation, I had really studied hard and I'd also really partied hard. And I was paying the price for it. So I hobbled up to the stage at graduation to accept the Writer of the Year award. And I was on crutches. I also had a scholarship to the University of Judaism that next fall. I was going to a Jewish university at the time. Having grown up Reform, I wanted to be a rabbi. That was really my goal. But my plans were foiled because 1 week after graduation, I got the cast off and I boarded a plane for my very first trip to Israel. The problem was when we got up to such a high elevation, the metal remnants that were still in my foot began hurting and my foot started swelling. And as the hours started going by, it's a pretty long trip. First, we went to Europe, then we went to Israel. It was over 10 hours, this first leg. A lot of the teens on the trip started falling asleep on the airplane around me, and I could not fall asleep. And there was no amount of ibuprofen or melatonin that was going to do the trick for me. And I never fell asleep. And that became one day turned into two, turned into three. And by the end of the week, I had not slept very much at all. And I had started to hallucinate. So I was sent home from the trip. And my mom, like any loving, caring mother in the 90s, what did she do? She took me straight to a psychiatrist office. And it was my very first psychiatrist I'd ever been to. It was very intimidating. I remember his office was formal. It had these mahogany wood paneled walls and green sort of velvet trimmings and carpet, and sat down on his couch. And within the first 15 minutes of him observing my rapid speech, and I must have looked absolutely exhausted, he said to me, there, I understand what the situation is. You have something called bipolar 1. You have a lifelong brain disorder. Not to worry, if you take these 3 drugs, you'll be fine. You'll have a fairly functional life. You might need to lower your standards, but you'll be, by and large, okay. Needless to say, I was shocked. Hearing that I had this disorder in the year 1998, I'd never met someone, to my knowledge, who'd had this diagnosis. So it was very scary to think about the fact that, just weeks prior, I had my whole life planned out, and receiving this disorder and then also starting to take those prescription drugs, I became a different person. Within a few weeks, I'd gained 20 pounds. My brand new college wardrobe did not fit me. By the time I got to college, I couldn't stay awake some days for more than 5 hours. I would sleep up to 20 hours a day. And I tried so many different things. I would go to biofeedback. I went to a different psychiatrist, and I felt this absolute exhaustion. The only things I could really look forward to were eating and sleeping. And it was tough. I would push myself to try to take walks, and I would feel very unwell. And looking back, the story goes on. There's a lot that happened. That was really the beginning of a roller coaster for me, and the beginning also of learning and learning lessons, oftentimes the hard way. Which is why I wrote my book, because here I am 28 years later. I've learned these lessons. I've learned to feel, thank God, better than I've ever felt before in my life. And I've also learned that everything I was told by both of those medical doctors is actually not true. With what we've learned, with the advances that have happened in science and in the cutting edge of psychiatry, nothing I was told is true. The chemical imbalance theory has since been debunked time and time again by very credible sources. The field of critical psychiatry, led by Joanna Moncrief, for example, is one such person who's really debunked it, and well. Then, in terms of what I was told in that first psychiatrist meeting, there were some risk factors that weren't addressed. And so we know today that any healthy human being that misses sleep for more than 48 hours can be prone to having delusions and can become psychotic. We all have delusions of some sort as we fall asleep at night. So there is something really, really important about the sleep-wake cycle. And when someone doesn't have proper sleep, they're prone to mania. Some other risk factors include SSRIs. Prozac is one of that class of drug. That's a risk factor for mania. Stress is a risk factor. Stress throws off the entire nervous system. Stress can present itself as a number of different mental health issues. hormonal issues, as well as deficiencies in magnesium, deficiencies in vitamin D, a low ferritin levels, which is iron storage. So some really basic blood tests I was never given. Decades later, I discovered that I had a high level of need when it came to many of those things. As a high school senior, as much as I studied hard, again, like I said, I partied hard. And part of that was at grad night, we all ate psilocybin mushrooms. And that, my friends, is also a risk factor for mania and for hallucinating. So in any case, so much of what I was told, it really set me back. It was really, really challenging. I lost my scholarship. Freshman year, I had to withdraw from that university. But I came back to the drawing board. I went on. I think my journey would have been really 97% smoother and easier had I known then what I know now. But that's a little bit of a glimpse into how it all started.
Wow, that's incredible. Listen, we know with all medical advances that if we had known then what we know now, we know it with so many people, different things, not necessarily your story. So now going forward, as an adult, are you a lot more aware of things around you when you see with your family, anything maybe with your own kids? Was there any relapse in your adult life, or like once you found the right doses or the right things, you were, everything was stable?
So for me, what I've learned is that for me and for many people, these prescription psych drugs can be useful, especially in the short term when it comes to regulating sleep. But by and large, for me, the I call it the four P's. It's really paying attention to biopsychosocial, spiritual aspects. I call it four P's for physiology, psychology, people, and purpose, which is what I talk about in my book. And it's really from it's become second nature, but it's having a consciousness every day and paying attention to, for example, something like physiology. Self-care is not selfish. It's really a form of self-love. And paying attention to our physiology, taking care of our physiology, our brains and our bodies are inextricably connected. And so, really important things like sleep, having something as simple as having an earlier bedtime can change our brains immensely because it increases the amount of deep sleep that we get. That's an example. So, sleep, another issue is food. There is an entire field of something called metabolic psychiatry. It is up and coming. It's absolutely incredible. I first discovered it in 2023 through a Harvard psychiatrist named Dr. Chris Palmer. And long story short, he discovered with one of his patients who was treatment resistant, kept having psychosis, and also happened to be very, very obese, that this man had, when he went on a ketogenic diet, which is a very, very low carb medical diet, his symptoms went away. And so they took this story, they took it to the lab and they started testing different types of diets for people with these diagnoses, bipolar, schizophrenia, and then it went on to OCD, and now it's even symptoms of Parkinson's and movement disorders. It's really grown. So it's called metabolic psychiatry. And as I read his book, I started seeing myself in the story with these different risk factors and making different connections. And so I learned more about this particular type of metabolic intervention. And after the war started, I began doing this very, very low carb, whole foods plan. I do write about it at length in the book as well. And I, like so many people who have implemented this, have seen tremendous results. So that's by way of food. And then there are also, some basic interventions if someone is dealing with brain fog, anxiety, depression. There are some really tried and true interventions in terms of adding more whole foods into the nutrition plan and making sure to get healthy proteins and fats and balancing blood sugar. Blood sugar is, the new Surgeon General in the United States, Dr. Casey Means, writes at length about blood sugar. And that's something that if we can get that in control, we slow the aging process in our body. We support brain health, and we can also add years to our life and prevent 90% of chronic disease. So, for my mental health and also physical health, that's been tremendous. And also movement. movement has been something that I've reincorporated into my life in a big way. And in the beginning, as much as it was challenging, I look forward to it every day now as like a vacation. In my book,
What do
actually,
you
I
talk about movement? Going for daily walks, going for runs?
so for movement, a huge one is building muscle. Muscle, the amount of muscle that we have in our bodies is actually correlated with the length of life. Specifically, the muscle, our quads. So the more muscle we have, the longer lives we have, and muscle also helps slow glucose absorption. And so we end up having a more stable blood sugar the more muscle that we have. We end up much less likely to have accidents in our older years the more muscle that we have. And so I've worked really hard on building muscle and, getting in better cardio shape. And that's been a huge one for me. And again, in the beginning, a lot of people ask me, Ozzy, how do you do this every day? It must be so hard. And my answer to that is, in the beginning, it felt challenging. And at the same time, I feel so blessed because I was able to come up with tips and tricks and tools and a strategy. I've actually coined this term. It's called ECHO. It's a method, and it's the way in which we can embrace change and make change easier for ourselves. So think about for a moment anything that you want to implement in your life. The first step in deciding whether or not you want to implement that change or that upgrade is education. I'm a huge proponent of education, getting the facts, getting the information, getting those concepts down, figuring out what are the procedures I might need to know and go through, and really making sure that we learn and we learn that well. The next step is C, which is curiosity. And this is really the secret sauce. It's asking ourselves, oftentimes when it comes to change, the nervous system can get activated, which begins this what if cycle. What if it's hard and anticipating challenges and difficulties. But curiosity says, but what if it's enjoyable? What if it's not going to be as hard as you think? What if this opens doors in your life that you can't even see right now? So that's the curiosity piece. H is for healing, and that's really allowing whatever happens to happen. And the O is observation, where we take stock and we have a mindful look at, is this adding something to my life? Is this helping me? Is this a piece of my healing? Or is this something that I want to let go of? And making that decision. And then it's just coming back to the drawing board. And at any point, really utilizing that ECHO method to make the changes that you want to see happen in your life.
Absolutely. Well, I love that echo method of yours, and we think alike with so many other things. I'm also a huge proponent of education and change and everything. Wow, Dr. Azi Jankovic, it was an absolute pleasure having you on our show today. As I'm sure all of you will agree, whether you joined us live or whether you're watching the recording, wishing you much hatzlacha, only good health, Bezrat Hashem, and lots of luck with your book.
Amen. Thank you,
It's
Lesley.
really,
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for creating community and inspiring all of us.
you're very welcome. Thank you. And thank you once again for being our guest on the Monday Motivation Spotlight. Thank you to all of you for joining. Once again, your weekly spotlight where we have inspiration, motivation, and when we hear inspiring stories from Israelis, whether it's personal or business stories. Thank you again to our sponsors, Nardis Advisors, as well as to Egan & Cohen Insurance. May we have Am Yisrael, a good, safe, quiet week. We just never know what tomorrow brings. But as he mentioned, and as we've mentioned, and I've mentioned many times, we've got one Eretz Yisrael, one Am Yisrael, and there's no other place that we'd like to be. Thank you again for joining. Thank you, Azi. Wishing you a good, safe day. Bye-bye.